I'm curious, how often do you think you're aware of the experience in your body, of paying attention to the sensations that you feel inside? Maybe you're wondering, why would I want to spend time paying attention to my body when there's all this other stuff to pay attention to? Or maybe you think, yeah, that could probably be helpful, but I don't have the time and energy to do more and spend more in my already full and busy life. Well, welcome to Soma'ing, the video series where we explore how and why cultivating the capacity to pay attention to our bodies actually makes a difference in everything that matters to us, and provides you with practical tools that you can use in your life. I'm your host, Dr. Twyla Kowalenko, here in East Toronto, where I work as a movement facilitator, somatic educator, coach, community catalyzer, DJ, dancer, and mother. And I am passionate about what is known as somatics, or what I call Soma'ing. Don't let unknown jargon scare you away, because really all that means is anything that helps us cultivate the capacity and just pay attention to our bodies in our lives, anywhere and everywhere. So join me as I interview some people working in the area of Soma'ing, where they share their stories of how being able to pay attention to their bodies has made a difference in what matters to them, and where they share hands-on practical tools that you can use in your life to make a difference in what matters to you. Here we go. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you've agreed to be on my pilot of this series of Soma'ing, and to share, your experience and your stories and your wisdom. So I'd love to introduce you, and then maybe you can introduce yourself and add to, because there's a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've known Annette, I think a couple years. We met sort of in crossing, being in similar fields in Annette's work in focusing. But we really got connected when we were in the same coaching program, Thinking into Results with Hina Khan, and really saw some connection and overlap in our work. And so over the past, I guess it's a year and a half now, that Annette and I have been cultivating our friendship, and we're in a mastermind together. So I get a chance to really learn from and grow with your knowledge and your wisdom, and as in our businesses and what matters to us. So I love what you do, and I'm really excited for you to share with our audience the work that you do and what can make a difference in their life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, it's been great to get to know you, and I guess to add to who I am. One of the things I always like to talk about is that I grew up in Northern Ontario and spent a lot of time in nature. And so the environment and sustainability are really dear to my heart. And what we're going to talk about today, focusing, is a practice that I realized eventually, the reason I was so drawn to learning it and teaching it was that it helps us be in our body. And when we're in our body, we can be more connected to the earth and make decisions that are better for the earth. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about that and the practice. And
Yay. Yeah. Hey, I'm so excited for you to share and to learn more about you. I'm sure there's stories that I don't know. So, the focus of this series is really to provide our listeners or watchers, audience, with stories from your life of how you've been able to cultivate more capacity to attend to pay attention to your body. And and how that's made a difference for you in something that really matters to you, like how you've been able to use that. And yeah, so I'd love for you to share an area of your life where you've really seen the difference by being able to have this capacity to attend to what you're feeling inside.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I have a story that is comparison. So I had 2 breakups in my life, that one was well before I learned focusing and one well after. So it's a really nice comparison about how my body coped with the breakup. So the first one, I was in my mid-20s and somebody broke up with me. And I think I cried for 6 months. It was the same thing. I would cry and I would get really flooded. I would be really in the crying. It was cathartic. And then I would fall asleep. So I would shift in my nervous system from that sympathetic fight, flight, flooded place to a dorsal, that's a technical word, but that shut down, numb, collapsed place where I would fall asleep. And it would just be this cycle. Nothing would change every day, this crying. And so there was no, what we call in focusing, carrying forward, which is a beautiful word to say that there's something changing, that we're getting an insight, that we can see the world a little bit differently. So about, how long ago now? 7 years ago or so, 8 years, I learned focusing. I learned it first with in therapy. And then I learned the practice and learned to teach it. And focusing practice, just to take a step back, is a practice where we really listen to the body and we notice really subtle, murky, vague physical feelings, because the body speaks to us in whispers. And we call that place that we're attending to physically the felt sense. And so there's a lot of information that comes first in these just kind of small little sensations that normally most people probably don't realize are there. They inform them. There's this saying, story follows state. So when when we're feeling anxious, we might not notice the anxiousness if it's just subtle, but we'll be changed because of it. And so fast forward to a breakup that I had about 2016, late 2016, early 2017. So this is a couple of years into really training for focusing and knowing the practice. And what would happen was really different. There was periods of crying, but every time I cried, I would learn something about myself. There would be a word, a phrase that would come out, and I would notice why I was crying that day. There were all these, what we could call facets, like these different strands that connected this breakup and my relationship to previous trauma. And so there was fears of abandonment. There was fears of being alone that would come up, and they were really distinct, like feelings like, oh, they're not going to come back, or I forget now. There were lots of them. I'd have to look in my notebook because there were 8 or so that came out. And so each time I was in the crying, it wasn't just this loop. I didn't get nearly as flooded. I stayed more grounded. So there was a part of me that was crying, and there was another part of me that was grounded and holding space for myself. So I really learned through focusing to be compassionate with myself. This beautiful compassion where you can like hold space for yourself. And it's interesting because so often we are the most mean to ourselves. We would never speak to other people sometimes the way we speak to ourselves. And it's such a powerful thing to learn to be with ourselves the way we are with the most tender people in our lives. And so in doing that, that created space for those words to come, for this carrying forward, this movement, this healing to happen. And so that breakup, while equally painful in many ways, it didn't draw out for so long. And I learned, and I felt like I really grew through that breakup because I knew more about myself, because the pain, like the triggers were helping me heal things from the past rather than just being stuck in this loop.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so instead of going back and forth from these dead ends, like I wouldn't have that experience of letting myself flood and then falling asleep, because I didn't ever flood so much. Kind of going, I'm putting hands on two sides because I'm in my head, I have this mental image of the model of my focusing teacher, Jan Winhall, has this felt sense polyvagal model, which is the model of the nervous system. And her addition to the idea of the nervous system is really that when we have bad habits or addictions, when we get stuck in these loops, we're really just helping ourselves physically shift, like neurophysiologically shift from that flight to that shutdown, or vice versa. And so I really saw that in the first breakup, where like I would have these shifts of going from crying too much and then sleeping. And that with focusing practice, I could, when the tears would come, when the wounded would come, I could learn something new and shift back down to grounded. Yeah. And so there's a real difference. Like sometimes when we think of tears, some tears are helpful. They bring knowledge or sometimes they are a release. And other times tears get us stuck in this loop and they're not helpful. They're just, they're compelling. We like it. It's like, but they don't carry us forward.
Yeah, it sounds like because of doing this work, you can better discern. Because I know for me, sometimes when I get in a teary place, then it's like, sometimes I'm not even clear. Like, is this helpful, or am I just kind of like spiraling in circles? And it sounds like you've cultivated the capacity to discern that and to cultivate more of that forward moving, releasing.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of getting stuck in the dead ends, as Gene Genlin is the creator of focusing. So he called those two places in the nervous system dead ends. We're able to have those felt shifts, which is of that carrying forward. There's because when that happens in the body, when we get the right phrase, like the phrase that comes out, for example, in those crying examples, then there'd be a shift in my body, like, oh, okay, that's what that's about. The body feels lighter after that. Yeah. And so focusing practice is a way of teaching us how to discern those subtle sensations in the body and then symbolize them with words or phrases. Sometimes they're images. And what happens is when the physical and the symbol match, that's when we get those beautiful felt shifts that we go, oh, okay, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I wonder for our listeners, if they have, or audience, if they have never heard of focusing, this might sound like a daunting thing, like words and so I'd love for you to share a little bit more to orient them. And I know you're going to lead us through a practice, and I wonder if there's any. You've already been telling us a little bit about focusing. Is there anything else that you could share with our audience, like any necessary orientation they need, or is it really just best to experience it firsthand?
I guess the one thing I'll say is that it's really important to feel safe in the body. You can't focus when you aren't feeling safe and grounded. Otherwise, what can happen is you would just be triggered and go straight up into that flooded feeling, or you could shut down. And so it's really important if we're new to an embodiment practice and we don't have many tools in our toolkit, for example, breath work or body scans, meditation, these ways of knowing how to ground. So other people use like walks in nature. If you don't have that, you want to kind of tread lightly into this, because sometimes if you haven't been looking here, it can be challenging. And so we want to really develop the skill of emotionally regulating, of being able to notice when we start to have too much emotion, and then be able to clear some space to get, we call it get the right distance. So to really just step back from whatever we're holding space for. Sometimes it's helpful to imagine it in 3D. So for example, there's yourself that's holding space, and then there's the part of you that is speaking to you. And so we can sometimes imagine them sitting on a bench in front of us or sitting on our lap. That can be helpful to create the distance. And actually the first step of focusing, the first movement that Jean Genlin created is called clearing a space. And it's really a preparatory step. And it's really about having yourself be in the body in a grounded way so that you're ready to focus. So we can think about it as if you were to do a painting, you would need canvas and paints and maybe an easel or a palette, for example. So we have to create the space. And so clearing a space is one way to do that. And we can do that kind of a bottom-up way or a top-down way. So a kind of a more top-down way is kind of asking what's in the way of feeling okay right now and noticing what comes, and then visualizing yourself putting it beside you. And that's directly beside you, kind of like a stack of books, or it could be in a box on a shelf, or sometimes we put the thing outside. So like out in the hall, outside the door. And we're just saying, okay, just for now, I'm putting that beside me. And when we do that, not just in a visual way, but we really put it down, we feel that shift in our body. They're like, oh yeah, for now, I've just put that down. And when we clear all the things that are in the way, then we have a space inside. We have some, that grounds us so that we're able to bring one thing back in to spend some attention on focusing. The other way to go about it, to get into that grounded and safe and social place, is more bottom up. And so breath work, body scans are beautiful. There's a beautiful practice by David Rome called Grounded Aware Presence, where we ground our feet, and we could do that today. Ground our feet. We notice sounds and other sensory information around us. So we could become aware, and then we cultivate that compassionate way of being with ourselves. We call it the focusing attitude inside, and create that energy to be open and non-judgmental with something that's going to come forward.
I think in almost all the facilitation I do of like somatic awareness, I almost always start with just tuning into what we feel beneath us. So right now I'm on a chair, and if an audience was on a bed, or even walking, with feeling the really feeling that sensation and tuning in and spending and being able to settle into and feel how much support is there. Because even if I let go of all my muscles, this chair is supporting me. And that simple practice is something I take into my life, especially times that I might, be getting more activated. Just that attention that takes a moment to feel the sensations of the ground, the chair, the bed, whatever it is there, and feel how solid it is beneath us. So you're going to guide us through that. And I'm curious because, if you were working live with someone and they got to a place where it wasn't a safe exploration for them anymore, that you'd be able to help them a little bit more. And so I'm just wondering for our audience right now, because they're not in real time with us, what advice would you give to them to make sure that they care for themselves, and if they need to stop the recording? To make sure that they have what they need going in and can take care of themselves, because we're not directly there with them right now.
So stopping the recording is a great thing, to just pause. And then when you pause, what you can do is do whatever helps you ground. And so if there's a certain breath work that helps you, you could go back to that. Go back to feeling your feet on the floor, like you just said, or the chair, the built environment that's supporting you. Other things you can do is open your eyes and orient to the room. Find something that's pretty or calming, soothing. So for example, the blanket that's behind me has pretty colors for me. So I could look at the blanket and the blanket would calm me down a little bit. Feeling that getting more distance is helpful. So if you were starting to be with something, just letting yourself kind of walk away from it, like just kind of saying, okay, I'm just going to push it a little bit away and just pause can be helpful. And if you're doing the opposite, if you're actually shutting down, if you're starting to numb or dissociate, then walking, like movement, is really helpful. And so pausing and taking a few minutes to walk around, maybe going outside, you reactivate a little bit. Yeah.
And I wonder what advice you might have to discern when something is not safe versus, because I know when we do work and we're with something that can feel kind of intense in our bodies, like how would you advise someone to discern whether, you know, what's safe or not? Or is that something, you know, that you could even advise generally? I'm curious.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is to notice if you're still grounded. If there's a part of you that feels like, if you can feel your feet, if you can feel some self-compassion, then you're asking yourself, can I be with this? And that's actually the question we'll ask. Is it okay to be with this? Can you? And if your body says yes, then it's okay. And if your body says no, then it's not. And it's as simple as that. And like all trauma, because usually when we're getting into territory where it doesn't feel safe anymore, we're starting to flood, it's probably a trauma that's coming up. And you know, there's no clear answer. One person will have a very different experience. For example, I love in Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, he tells the story of Stan and Uta, who are in a car accident together. It was a very foggy day, and there was a big pileup. And they did brain scans of their experience, recalling the accident. And one of them completely flooded and one completely numbed. Like they very different experiences. We can go to those different places in our nervous system. And so there's no rule. We can't say, you know, this is what's going to be okay and not. And similarly, you mentioned, like, because the audience is on their own right now, other than our voice is here guiding them. Maybe just for a moment, I could say a little bit about what the experience is like when you do it in partnership, because focusing practice is best done in partnership. There's something really beautiful about having space held and something about the co-regulation that we provide each other, that we can go places with a witness, with a guide, that we can often not do on our own. There are certain exceptions. There are people who I know who prefer focusing on their own, but generally speaking, most people prefer to do the practice with somebody else. And probably a lot of that has to do with that when you're focusing on relational issues, the healing happens in relationship as well.
It's true. And I can also imagine, because I know of years of doing somatic work, it's really helped me cultivate the capacity for holding space, even for things that are really intense. So the more that I practice things on my own, the more I have capacity to do that, which means I can, you know, use the tools, use the attentional practice, not necessarily needing to go to, you know, a practitioner or even another person. I mean, it's wonderful to do that, and to also be able to have tools and capacity in our lives when things are really happening in this moment, in the busyness of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that makes me think of, like, how can we use focusing outside of the practice? It's like anytime something happens in life and you notice a physiological change, you can just pause and go inside, take a moment and just notice what's happening in you, and do like a micro focusing. It's just, what's happening? Where do I have sensations? What are they telling me?
Yeah.
That works.
So I really wanted to get into the practice, and I just have one more question, because, you know, the way we've been talking, the audience might think, you know, this is a really intense practice only to be used around trauma or something, because we've been practicing is with all this, you know, care around safety and about how trauma shows up. And I'm wondering if you can share, you know, why and when we would use this practice.
Yeah. Well, so I'll say two things. One is you can use it for any creative process. So we can really, anytime we want to know our body's wisdom, we can use this practice. So it's not just about solving problems and looking backwards, but it's also about creating the future and how do I want to move forward? And there's a lot of wisdom that comes there. And Jean Genlin created a second practice, which is related, called Thinking at the Edge. And that's a practice specifically about working with words and our felt senses to create. And so we can really utilize the body wisdom. And it's really our intuition, we have these feelings that once we symbolize into words, then we have the insights of like, oh, okay, that's what I can do. And so it's really a beautiful practice. And I find like we do mindfulness practice to be more mindful in general. And I think focusing practice is a beautiful practice to be more, like I would say, call it some sort of like embodied mindfulness, like just much more aware of more subtle physical sensations that are at a level that we typically don't pay attention to.
I've heard the term bodyful before. I kind of like that.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And it is. I mean, this is what somatic work is. This is the attention. It's an attentional practice, and we are practicing paying attention to things all the time, usually unconsciously. You know that we're paying attention to something all the time, and these practices are about consciously turning our attention, which is what mindfulness practices are, and somatic practices are consciously attending to the sensations in our body. So some mindfulness practices are that, and some are not. And here we're specifically focused on that because we really believe that being able to tune into the sensations in the body, the wisdom in the body that connect us to this present moment, to others and the planet, really matters, which is why you and I do this work.
Wow. So. And staying with the sensations, that's a big difference. In a lot of other practices, we notice and then we let them go. And so we're constantly clearing. And focusing really differs because we stay with, and we say, oh, what do you want to tell me? And we stay with sensations until they're complete, until they shift. Yeah.
Okay. Well, shall we go into, guiding the audience into a practice to really, like, there's been so much around this and to actually experience what this could look like for them.
Yeah. So I invite you in the audience to either close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever feels comfortable. And we're going to begin by just noticing our brow. And if you could just soften your brow. And then your eyes. Softening the eyes. And the jaw. You might yawn, or you might notice your temples and you might want to give a little massage. And then I'll invite you to bring your attention to your neck and shoulders. And notice if you'd like to roll them. Sometimes it's helpful to visualize just letting the weight drop off. Just sliding off your body. And then I'll invite you to sink down into wherever you're making contact with your chair or wherever you're being supported. So your sit bones, your thighs, your feet. And You could notice how the floor pushes back on your feet. How the chair holds you. And you could say to yourself, grounded. And then I invite you to notice any sounds in your space. These might be inside or outside. Natural or man-made. And then you might notice smells in your space. And then the clothing on your skin. And finally, the air on your skin, on your hands, on your face. The breath at your nostrils. And you can say to yourself, aware. And then I invite you to put your hands on your heart if you'd like. And we'll take a few deep breaths. And I invite you to imagine that you're breathing through your heart. And I invite you to cultivate the focusing attitude. And so this is a way of being self-compassionate, open and welcoming to whatever wants to come, non-judgmental, kind to ourselves. So you can just check, how are you doing in your body now? Do you feel grounded and calm? Or is there something in the way of that? And if there's anything in the way of you and just feeling fine right now, then I invite you to imagine yourself putting that beside you at just the right distance. So that might be quite close, or you might want it across the room or even outside the door. So what's in the way? And once you've put it down in the right spot, noticing how your body feels differently. And if there's no change, then you're probably still holding it. So I invite you to try again, to really just put it down for now. You'll come back to it. You can let it know. Just temporarily clearing some space. And you can ask your body again, is there anything else in the way? Sometimes we have 5 or 6 things. And if you're feeling clear and grounded right now, then I invite you to ask your body for a word or a phrase about what it's feeling at the moment. And if you're working on clearing space, you can ask again, is there anything else in the way? And I'm going to go on now, but if you still need some more time to clear space, you can pause the recording and take that time. So now we can ask the body, what wants my attention right now? And it might be one of those things you've just cleared. One of those might want to come back. Or something completely different might come. And typically it starts with some sort of vague, murky, subtle physical sensation. So we're asking, what wants my attention right now? We're just noticing, where do sensations come? And when you have something, I invite you to really describe it. Beginning with where it is in your body. And what size it is. Is there a shape? Something like a golf ball or a grapefruit or a long tube. And then noticing any other qualities in the physical sensations. There might be a density. Maybe it's warmer or colder than the rest of you. Maybe it has a movement quality, like a pulsing. And sometimes there's a color or a sound. So as the felt sense begins to form, you get to know it. You might notice if there's an emotional quality to it, or maybe a few. So we could slowly begin to symbolize it. And then I invite you to ask your body, what's this all about? What are you trying to tell me? And inviting your body to give you an interesting word or word combination, sometimes a phrase or a metaphor or an image to let you know what it's telling you. What is it wanting you to know? And you might get something clearly and quickly, or there might be many options coming forward. And so if that's the case, I invite you to go back and forth between the physical sensations, and they might be changing as you do this, and the symbol options that are coming forward. Going back and forth until you feel like, yeah, that's what it is. That's what this is. Once you know what it's about, you can ask your body what else it wants you to know about this. And here I invite you to really notice how the physical sensations change. Are you still in the same area of your body? Did your word or phrase or image make it shift completely? Maybe you're in a new area of your body. Or maybe it's still unfolding. So asking it, what else does it want you to know? And then if it's a problem that you're working on, you could ask it, what's the worst about all of this? And if it's a more creative challenge, you could ask your body, what's really important? And again, noticing physically how your body responds. Any subtle sensations. And then we can ask a final question for now, and that would be, what does it need? What does your body need? And when it feels complete, you can take a moment to thank your body for whatever wisdom it shared with you, and thank yourself for taking the time to listen and to pause. And when you're ready, you can come back to Twyla and I. You're muted.
Yeah. I was saying, and for me to come back to, yeah. Yeah. What a gift to have space held by you, Annette.
Wow.
Thank you. And I don't want to spend time sharing about my experience right now. I wonder if you have any final words just about that practice before some final questions. Anything that you'd love the audience to know?
Yeah. I guess I would say what's really important is to ask open-ended questions of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Really where magic happens, and that there really aren't that many questions that we need to ask. It's really about what's this about, and where's the issue, and then what would better be, what would the future look like. And I guess the one thing that comes up often is that when we start to look at the future, what an action step might be, especially if we ask that question, if we ask specifically what might a right next step be, that sometimes the mind will slip back in, and we'll have like our, if you will, already always listening answer will come up. And so we really need to notice if we're still listening to the body. And so that would be the one thing to notice is, did you pause? Did you wait long enough? Did it really come from the body?
And how would you guide someone to discern, where the answer is actually coming from, or are they completely separate? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one, if it comes really quickly, it probably came from your mind. And if it's really familiar, like of course I'm thinking that. It's like the old way of thinking, and change happens when we do something in a new way. We see things in a new way. There's some sort of paradigm shift. And so if it doesn't feel new, if it doesn't have a feeling of relief with it, of like, oh yeah, that feels better, then it's probably old ways of being that they're sneaking in.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you. So, this practice that you led us, obviously was something where we needed to pause. So, for somebody watching or listening, in order to really practice, they needed to be able to be somewhere still and close their eyes. So it wouldn't have worked, if they were in the middle of life, driving, cooking, whatever is happening. And I'm curious if there, what tips or tools or techniques, or how to apply kind of this orientation when we're in our life. And it's wonderful when we can make the space to pause, and sometimes it's not possible. We're in the middle of something, and what would you guide the audience to apply this in a way that they could take it into what's happening?
Yeah. Well, first I want to challenge a little bit that it's not possible to pause. There's often a way to pause, and that could be going to the washroom, or, it's sometimes we need to learn to say, I just need a moment, and take a time out. Like it's especially if it's an interaction with somebody, it's like, I just need a moment to think about this, or there's ways of asking for a pause.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, of course, if you're driving or doing something, that I find as we learn to spend more attention with the embodied sensations, it's kind of like you turn up your intuition your intuitive powers, and things will flow through you without needing to really practice so quickly. But that there is power in doing that practice, so that when you are out and about, that you're more aware of the subtle. Yeah. And if you can't pause, sometimes it's more a factor of noticing afterwards, and then taking a moment to pause when you can pause. Right? Oh, I didn't like the way I reacted to that person, and my response. Let me focus on that to figure out like what happened there and unpack it, so that next time your body might respond in a different way.
And if somebody was, intending to take a pause and cultivate, practicing this orientation, how would they, is there a way they could do that on their own? This was nice having you guide us, and, we don't always have access to be able to put on a recording or work directly with someone. So what could somebody do?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to learn what helps you feel safe in your body. And so everybody's a little bit different. Most people will find nature soothing some way. And so we can cultivate memories is one way to do it, is to go back to a memory that you felt safe and calm to you, and to have a visualization to get there. But like I've said, breath work or body scans, like some people will be helped greatly if they hold their breath. For example, there's a breath called the 4-7-8 breath, where you breathe in for a count of 4 through your nose, and you hold it for 7, and then you breathe out for a count of 8. But some people don't find that soothing. So it's really a practice of experimenting and noticing what works for your body, what is soothing. And, it can be counterintuitive. For example, people who have ADHD, they need a bit more movement to be soothing. So for them, calm does not look the same as somebody else who might not move, and that is calming to them. So it's really about learning what feels calming to you, so that when you notice that you're starting to be activated, that you have something in your toolkit that works for you.
Yeah. And that's some of the intention of this series, is to be providing some of those tools. And so people can hear from different practitioners and hear different techniques. And so you've just been sharing a little bit about, the grounding aspect of it. And I'm curious also about, the capacity focusing has to gain insight. And is there a specific, a practice somebody could do, like certain questions or something they could ask of themselves as they move through life, when they notice they would like to connect to the wisdom in their body, whether it's for creativity or for shifting something.
Yeah. Well, from my experience, the wisdom comes in those felt shifts that I talked about, where your body feels different. And that happens when you're symbolizing. And so there's different ways to do it. But the main thing is to just notice what you're sensing. And we can intuitively kind of know what questions to ask, because it really is, do I know what this is about? So if I don't know what it's about, I'm asking questions like, what is this all about? What happened? When did I start feeling this way? Like, you're exploring that. And then once you know what it's about, a beautiful question to ask is, does this feel familiar? So is this the first time I experienced this, or are there memories connected to it? And that's the way to go back. We didn't do that just now, but asking if it feels familiar is a way to go back to the first time you felt that way, or other times you felt that way. So you can investigate the patterns and learn about how something's affecting you. And I would say the more something is traumatic, the more you would want to have a listener helping you do that. Yeah. And when we're listening to ourselves, one way to do it is kind of to blend it with a meditation practice. I've done that many times, where we'll just sit, and then when something arises, rather than clearing it, we can just hold space for it. And that can be a good way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from what you've guided and the limited knowledge I have of focusing, there always also seems to be an orientation towards asking questions like, you know, what do I need to know about this? You know, questions where we're asking for new wisdom to arise. So not just what this is about, because that's what I heard you also guide myself and the audience through, to, you know, what's there, and then what else is a response or new information, or maybe some other sensation that balances this in a way we hadn't previously seen.
Yeah. So often there's other
questioning that. Any specific way that you'd guide people to tune into that, or questions that would be helpful to ask?
Yeah, we can ask what's in the way, or what is a part not wanting for us. So sometimes we know we don't want to have this, but we don't know why. Like there's often it's not just a two-part thing. There's like maybe 3 or 4 things in us that are interacting. And so there can be kind of like a tug of war. There's like a tension where one part wants to go forward and one part doesn't. And it's about discerning what are those different parts. And often those parts will live in different parts of our nervous system. They're protective parts, and one has more fight energy, for example, and one says no, retreat, and hide. And so dialogue is a powerful way of noticing what's active. So what are the thoughts in your head connected to this? That can really identify the different parts. And then other questions are, you know, there's some provocative ones, like what's ready to die, for example. Like, is there a part of you that's, you know, in the way, really, of achieving our goals? Sometimes I think very often, our personality developed in a way to protect us. When we're little, when we're children, we cannot do exactly what we want, essentially. And so we develop these personality types. So, you know, for me as a child, I was a perfectionist, and still am probably way too perfectionistic, but way less than I used to be. And over time, we realize, okay, that's getting in the way of other things, of our well-being and our happiness. And so it's about finding the parts of us that are grounded and compassionate and confident and courageous. I love the 8 C's of self-leadership, which come from Internal Family Systems by Richard Schwartz. And the other C's are things like calm and clarity, goodness. And so we can really cultivate those parts of ourselves as resources to bring forward into our practice, to find those other alternative ways. And what happens when we do that is that those protective parts feel like, oh, okay, there's somebody else here. There's an adult with those C qualities, and I can take a sabbatical or retire. And
I think the important thing to note is that these are practices. You know, it's not, you know, a singular journey to get some final place. This is continual practice, ongoing, as we move through life and all the things that change through it. And so I think it's helpful not to be trying to get somewhere or think we should do this once and it's done. You know, this is about cultivating our attention. And then so like you shared at the beginning, that you can bring this in and you have the capacity because you practice that attention. So you know, you've shared a practice people can do by listening, and some of the ways they can cultivate that attention through their lives, ways that they can pause and care for their body, and questions to keep cultivating and practicing more attention to their body and what they're feeling. And, you know, we didn't speak so specifically about, you know, your work you know, the work that you do. And so before we end, I'd love you to share with the audience a little bit more about what you do. So if, and how to get in contact with you. So if the audience do want to do some work with you and work with somebody who has some expertise that would love to learn more about focusing, you know, how can we find you? What do you do? And share that.
Sure. So I teach focusing. So I have a variety of workshops and courses that show people how to do this practice. And I especially concentrate my energies on showing people, teaching people how to listen in partnership, because it is so powerful. And building that skill. And very often what people do is in the class, they meet people and then they form ongoing partnerships. So, you know, you learn the skill and then you can ongoingly meet and have a partnership. And some people meet for years and years, like decades. So it's a really beautiful way of creating connection and community. And I also have a changes group, which is a drop-in way of coming and practicing focusing.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a couple things, and they're all on my website. My website is pupa.ca, so P-U-P-A. Pupa is the generic name for a cocoon or a chrysalis. And it's a metaphor I use for change. And so a lot of my work is to help people transform something in their lives. And whether that's learning to shift something with focusing or take on a bigger issue and over time tackle it with focusing.
And if somebody goes to your website, there'll be more, there's links and more information about what focusing is and some, you know, covering some of the things we talked about today.
There's also the community page has links to, for example, the Focusing Institute and Focusing on Board. And there's other communities and other practitioners. There's lots of teachers out there and different ways to learn around the world. And I also have some recordings on the exercises page. And I also have a few recordings on Insight Timer. And so there's different ways for people to explore.
Okay. And so on the links, as part of this, this series, I can share with our audience, you know, your website and these recordings and let them know. I didn't even say your full name. So just to let our audience know, this is Annette Dubreuil. Am I pronouncing, is that the correct pronunciation of your last name?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for your wisdom, for your care, yeah, for being part of this new series to really give people tools that support what matters to them in their life.
Thank you, Twyla. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I'm honored to be one of your first guests.
Yeah.
Best of luck.
Thank you.